Dr. Kolker is going to be our final speaker, and he splits his time between Louisiana University's Marine Consortium and the Department of Earth and Environmental Sciences at Tulane University. And he is here today to talk about river sediments and coastal bays, wetlands in the lower Mississippi River. Please help me welcome Dr. Alexander Kolker.
Thanks so much. As you said, I'm going to be talking about modern stuff. Not that Tor and Mark's research isn't modern, but it's focused much of it on the past. My research is just as contemporary as their research in the terms of production, but I really focus on the geologically recent and the geologically very recent, the last couple of years. There are lots of causes of wetland loss in Louisiana. It ranges from high rates of subsidence. People have talked about, but sort of two of the biggest ones that are out there are these very high rates of subsidence that Tor and Mark have talked about, and reduced sediment loads as well are an important part of the story. We've got a situation in Louisiana where, for the most part, there is not enough sediment reaching the wetlands for them to keep pace with the very high rates of subsidence. And one of the big reasons for this is that we've heavily levied the Mississippi River. As I'm sure all of you know, it's of course one of these ironies of flood protection. We have done a great job of levying the Mississippi River to protect against floods, river floods, and this has left us in a situation where the river no longer flows through its own delta, and many river sediments do not get to the wetlands that need it. If you take a look at this map, and as Mark has pointed out, everything in red is bad. There are a few small spots of green. They take a little bit of squinting to notice, but there are two spots over in the Atchafalaya Basin over by Morgan City. That would be roughly in the center of this USGS map center in the bottom. There's two little spots of green. That's where the Atchafalaya outflows into the Atchafalaya Delta and the Wax Lake Delta. And those areas have been developing since about the 1970s, since there were several large floods in the 1970s that pushed a lot of sand out into Atchafalaya Bay and allowed the water coming down the Atchafalaya, that's about 30% of the Mississippi River water, to deposit sediments. And we've actually had a reasonable amount of wetland development over there. We've also had a little bit of wetland development in the Bird's Foot region of the Mississippi Delta. Again, this is where the Mississippi Delta flows out into the open ocean. In some places where it's not controlled, or in some places where there have been artificial crevasses, we're getting river water to empty into the wetlands, and we're getting a little bit of wetland creation. And depending on how these areas are managed, we could get a little more. If I could have the next slide. Rates of relative sea level rise in the lower Mississippi River Delta and its plain are quite high. The rate of relative sea level rise at Grand Isle is on the order of about 9.5 or 10 centimeters a year, 10 millimeters a year. Depending on exactly when you look exactly what time period you look at, you'll get a slightly different result, but it's close to a centimeter a year. There are some suggestions that this rate may have been higher at certain points. If you look between the 1960s and the 1980s, some people have suggested that rate is higher, which was also a period, interestingly, of high hydrocarbon extraction. For about 20 years or so, there was a tide gauge down at South Pass at the very end of the Mississippi River, and that shows an enormous rate of relative sea level rise, a rate on the order of 3.5 centimeters a year, 37.5 millimeters a year. So incredibly rapid relative sea level rise out there. Now, what's driving that is a little bit of a question for people that work on longer time scales than I do, or at least outside of this realm of this talk. But they're very, very high. It's probably some combination of isostatic loading of the crust and compaction of Holocene sediments and of organic sediments. So there's a couple of different causes for these high rates of relative sea level rise. But this is sort of what they are, sort of modern rates of relative sea level rise are in the Delta Plain. There are some areas where you will probably get lower rates of relative sea level rise than this as well, I should mention. So the questions for this talk, the things that I was interested in really is how much sediment actually gets to these wetlands, particularly during normal periods and during floods. Last year, the Mississippi River flooded. It reached its highest level in something like 25 years. It was one of the largest floods on record, or at least one of the largest floods in the last 40 years, in which good river discharge data has been collected up at Tarbert's Landing. It was a pretty significant event, and so we use this flood as a model for understanding how the river works and whether or not we could use this as sort of a model for coastal restoration. And we also were interested in how patterns of sediment distribution during floods differ between wetlands and open water environments. We've got an incredible diversity of coastal environments in South Louisiana, and it's likely that they won't all respond the same to floods. And sort of generally, I want to know, how does this, if we get enough sediment during floods or during modern periods at all, during, quiet periods, to keep pace with recent rates of relative sea level rise? We can get that. This is an image from MODIS. NASA has satellites that look down on the Earth. Some of these some people have probably seen some of the images like this before. This is the river basically during pretty much during the peak of the flood, and you can see a lot of what happened during the flood. You can see we'll start in this. We can start at the Atchafalaya which was sort of the center and the bottom of the Mississippi Delta. You can see that there is a lot of the Atchafalaya Bay is quite brown. There was a lot of sediment being discharged through Atchafalaya Bay, which, as I said, gets 30% of the combined flow of the Mississippi River and the Red River comes down the Atchafalaya. You can see a huge sediment plume off the mouth of the Mississippi River around the Bird's Foot region. So a lot of sediment being discharged by the Mississippi River. And you can also see the Bonacary Spillway. This is a period when the Bonacary Spillway was open. There is a plume of muddy water just hugging the coast of New Orleans. We had some interesting winds during the opening of the Bonacary Spillway, and that kept the plume of water actually. It hugged the south and western shores of the bay, and to some extent the river was just kind of the plume actually kind of acted like a river and just flowed out from the Bonacary Spillway out in through the Wrigley's out into the northern Gulf. So this gives you just an image of what happened during this flood. And a lot of the studies that I'm going to be talking about today are going to be occurring down at the Bird's Foot region of the Mississippi Delta. There were there were a number of studies that were conducted out here by myself and by some colleagues from the University of Texas, whose work I'll reference. Some colleagues from the University of Texas worked up by Empire, which is up about here. We did some studies at a few different locations in the Bird's Foot region. We looked at West Bay, which is the site of an artificial river diversion. We looked at Pasalutra Wildlife Management Area, and in particular we looked at a complex of bays and a new island that is formed. So Stardust Bend is the area of the bays, and Dupree's Island is Island is the name of the new wetland that has formed in the last 20 years. And we looked at a little bit of Blind Bay out on the eastern end of Pasalutra Wildlife Management Area.